This looks fun and all, but let's start this video properly at the beginning.
Alright. Good morning, class. Thank you for coming. Today, I am Luke. I'm always Luke. I'm Luke every day, but you can call me Lucky. And today we're going to talk about the history of donuts in Japan. More specifically, we're going to be talking about a single franchise. Two, if you include its rival, but ultimately, our goal for today is to talk about the namesake of this video. The Carousel that brought donuts to Japan. First, let's look at a donut. This is pondering. It is a fast food icon in Japan. It is beloved probably by all. I would think that there is not a single person in Japan that doesn't know this iconic shape. And if you spend any amount of time in or around Japan or on social media, you will have seen this iconic donut. It is the Japanese donut. But this video isn't about this donut. This video is about where this donut came from. And this donut happens to be the flagship product of the fast food franchise, Mr. Donut. Mr. Donut is an internationally recognized franchise, asterisk included. It is famous mostly throughout all of Asia, and if you're old enough, you might remember it in North America as well. But we're not talking about North America today. Today, we're talking about Japan. And in Japan, Mr. Donut is the second most popular fast food franchise, falling just behind McDonald's. So that gives you a pretty big idea of how iconic this fast food franchise is. It is loved by everyone. Children love how sweet their products are. Pensioners love sitting in the Mr. Donut doing absolutely nothing all day. And office workers love rewarding themselves with some limited edition Pokemon donuts or matcha donuts or whatever the seasonal donut is at that time. Mr. Donut is truly a staple of the modern Japanese society. It is ubiquitous. The name Mr. Donut and the word donut are synonymous. If you want donuts, you go to Mr. Donut. But this wasn't always the case. You see, some 50 years ago, that is just 2 generations prior, there were no donuts to be seen. Take a look here at Ginza, Tokyo, 1970, not a donut in sight. Now, let's take a look at Ginza today. I'm joking, but really, look at Ginza today. It's magnificent. So what really happened between here and here? So I have to tell you the wild story that involves a generational rivalry, corporate chicanery on an international scale, and ultimately, the carousel that brought donuts to Japan. But this story is a long one, so let's start at the beginning. Chapter 1, Rival Company. Rival companies are what you get when 2 businesses are competing for the same market interests. Rival company are what you get when 2 people don't like each other but have to reside in the same place. And this story happens to be both. Allow me to introduce you to Bill Rosenberg and Harry Winokur. These 2 were stepbrothers, business partners, and business rivals in that order. So they were stepbrothers, and they weren't business partners until Bill Rossinger founded Dunkin' Donuts in 1950. And Dunkin' Donuts was doing pretty well business-wise for a couple of years and wanted to expand. However, Harry Winokur disagreed with the future of Dunkin' Donuts and proved to be a pretty bad business partner. So, eventually, Bill Rossinger bought Harry Winokur out for the sum of $350,000, which he used to found Mr. Donuts in 1956, proving that he was a pretty bad business partner, but an even worse stepbrother. Now, let's take a look at the timeline. So, starting in 1950, we have Rosenberg founding Dunkin' Donuts. In 1955, Dunkin' Donuts begins to franchise. Now, Whittaker found Mr. Doughnuts a year after this, 1956, and begins franchising in the same year. You'll notice here that both Dunkin' Donuts and Mr. Doughnuts begin to franchise at around the same time. The advantage of Dunkin' Donuts being that they started earlier. Now, let's continue. David Slater, the stepson of Whittaker, becomes the CEO in 1956. And a few years later, Rosenberg's son becomes the CEO in 1963. This rivalry has ended, but the rivalry continues. This is when our story becomes generational. Now, did these two hate each other like rivals? I don't know. Though I can imagine they probably weren't too friendly with each other, having two competing businesses in the same market. In 1968, Dunkin' Donuts opened itself to public trading in order to gather funds, and with funds in hand, they opened a location in Ginza, Tokyo, 1969. Now, put a pin in this one because this one's important. Let's go back to Mr. Donut. Look here, Mr. Donut gets acquired by a holding company, the International Multi-Foods Corporation, in 1971, and in the same year, because they moved so quickly, open a new location in Japan in Mino, Osaka, 1971. Now, our story has not only become generational, it has become international. If you know anything about Japanese culture or geography, you'll know that Osaka and Tokyo have not been on the best terms really ever. I mean, the cities alone are rivals. And so we take all of this rivalry and we have to say to ourselves, how is this so cool? Where in the world do you find a story so perfectly written like this? I mean, it's not obvious until you put it out into a timeline, but no one put it out into a timeline. Until I put it into a timeline. It's the timeline. You know how long I spent making this thing? I'm gonna put a pause on that because there's another timeline that's a lot longer than this. So, let's keep moving forward. Oh! It's the enemy of all teachers. This is adhesive, by the way. It's not just a bad marker. Take anything away from today's lesson, it's don't put adhesives on your whiteboard. Alright, let's keep going. So, let's take a look at the competitive strategy between Dunkin' Donuts and Mr. Doughnuts. On the left side, we have Dunkin' Donuts and they make coffee. They make donuts. They also make coffee. And their goal is to increase market share. That is to say, they want to open more locations in their existing markets. Now, in Mr. Doughnuts, we have making donuts. They also happen to make coffee as well. Big surprise. They both have the same products. Their goal, however, is to reach new markets, which is to say they're going to look into places where donuts have not been introduced as a product yet. So, it's going to look a little something like that. Now, the greatest difference between these two rivals is that Dunkin' Donuts started 5 years earlier than them. However, Mr. Donut grew a lot faster. So let's examine this battle strategy a little closer with how they franchise, starting with Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin' Donuts happened to open 100 stores by 1963, whereas Mr. Donut managed to open 275 stores by 1970. Now, I realize that these years don't line up perfectly, but this gives you a general idea of how rapidly Mr. Donut was expanding relative to its counterpart. Remember, that 5-year difference should have been a big game changer. But I'm not being fair without looking at all the facts. In 1968, Dunkin' Donuts went public, meaning they could be traded publicly with investors in the market. Whereas Mr. Donut got fully acquired by IMC, that is the International Multi-Food Corporation, in 1971. Again, the timing of these two companies are coming quite close to each other. Lastly, the first store that opened in Tokyo, in Ginza, 1969, largely was unsuccessful. Mr. Donut, on the other hand, opened their store in 1971 with major success. To summarize these 2 points, Dunkin' Donuts took a domestic approach to its operations. They wanted to grow within North America. Mr. Donut, on the other hand, took a blue ocean strategy. They wanted to open markets around the world. And soon we're going to see how these two strategies play out. So, Chapter 2, Consuming Donuts. This is Duskin Co. Not to be confused with Dunkin' from Dunkin' Donuts, this is a cleaning equipment rental company. They made the transition somehow from cleaning equipment to franchising. Don't ask me how, but they did. And they did in the year 1983. They gained the franchising right of Mr. Donut in all of Asia. But more specifically to our story, they rapidly expanded in Japan. But let's take a pause on this because you'll notice from the last slide that we jumped ahead about 10 years from 1970 to 1938. So let's take a moment to look at what happened in those years with the battle report. So from 1970 to 1998, Dunkin' Donuts had 15 locations in Japan. Good job, Dunkin' Donuts. However, Mr. Donut had 250 locations around the same time. In fact, earlier than Dunkin' Donuts. How did that happen? Now, let's take a look here. Dunkin' Donuts closed foreign civilian locations. I'm going to put a big underline in civilian. What does that mean? Well, as it turns out, the American Donut Company happened to be very popular with Americans who were very familiar with the American donut. Big surprise. The civilian population, however, wasn't so keen. On the other hand, Mr. Donut was experimenting with a new menu. Look at that, by 1979 they had Timbits, and guess what? That's what they're called. They're called Timbits, and I'm not going to call them any other name. So, I think it's pretty clear, looking at these numbers and the direction of these companies at this time, who the loser and who the winner was. The battle was finished, but the war was not over. 1989 is perhaps the most dramatic moment in this story. But let me set the stage for you. So, in 1989, Mr. Donut was a subsidiary of the International Multi-Foods Corporation, IMC for short, that's what I'm going to call it. And Dunkin' Donuts was still being publicly traded. Dunkin' Donuts was soon acquired by Allied Lyons. I'm not French, that's how I'm going to pronounce it. And with money in hand, they pulled a dirty trick and consumed Mr. Donuts. I know. Very sad, very anticlimactic. But we're not finished yet. And Allied Lyon then took Mr. Donuts directly from their subsidiary and put them onto the same level, later rebranding them as Dunkin' Brands. Dunkin' Brands also happen to have Baskin-Robbins, but that's not too important to our story. What is important is that this marked the end of the rivalry. They were now officially on the same team. 1 year later, Mr. Donut locations in all of North America were offered the option to rebrand themselves as a Dunkin' Donuts. Therefore, if you were an adult in 1985, you would probably remember that Mr. Donuts existed in North America. There were a few locations in Canada, mostly Toronto, which lasted until around the middle 2000s. But this wasn't entirely the end. Of course, I put an asterisk over here because there is the last Mr. Donut. This is the last remaining Mr. Donut, specifically right here. Enhance. 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 This Mr. Donut has become a sort of pilgrimage spot for some Japanese tourists who are willing to take the excruciating trip to suburban Middle America. But it happens. Coming back to our point here, this wasn't the end of Mr. Doughnuts. You see, across the ocean, we have what I like to call the Pacific Divide. Dunkin' Donuts gained 99.9% of the American donut market share. But new competitors would soon arrive to challenge their position. Krispy Kreme and Let's Go Tim's. Mr. Donuts, on the hand, gained what I think is the better prize. They gained full, independent, autonomous operations. That is to say, they got Asia. They established a deep cultural root in Japan, and we're going to get to that in just a minute, but this was in large part thanks to Duskin Corporation. Now, you might be tempted to believe that this is the end of the story. The rivalry has finished and the war is over, but it's not, because history reaches us even to the present. In 2005, Allied Lyons got acquired by another holding company, Pernod Ricard, and changed their name to Allied Dominique. Later, they sold the Dunkin' brand to a consortium of 3 private equity groups. This happened in 2006. In 2012, they reached full independence, and the Dunkin' brand functioned independently, on its own. It just did its thing, and it made money. And that's how it was for like a solid decade, until 2020, when they got acquired by a new company, Inspire. Now, depending on when you're watching this, this is a very recent development. And what will happen next is anyone's guess. But we're not done with the story yet. So let's do a quick summary. This is timeline number 2. Well, this takes us from 1950 to 1971. And down here we go from 1971 to 2025. In 1979, 250 stores were opened in Japan from Mr. Donuts. 15 stores opened in Japan 1982, that's Dunkin' Donuts. Duskin gains the franchising right, then acquired by Dunkin' Donuts, which was then acquired by Allied Lyons, then formed the Dunkin' brands. North American Mr. Donuts were renamed to the Dunkin' Donuts, and Mr. Donuts in North America essentially ceased to exist. 2005, acquired by Pernod Ricard, then sold off to private equity. Independent operations from 2012 onward until they were acquired in 2022 by Inspire Brands. Now, there's one thing that we're overlooking. There's a big question that I glossed over, and I'll highlight it for you real quick. It happens right here. Now, if you're smart and you've been listening well, you probably already figured out what I'm about to ask, and you might even know the answer already, but here's the question. Why did Dunkin' Donuts fail so miserably in Japan? And why did Mr. Donut succeed so well? In order to answer this question, we have to talk about one thing: the first donut. This is the old-fashioned. It was invented in England sometime between the 1700s and the 1800s, and for lack of better terms, it was essentially just deep-fried bread. Fast forward a significant amount of time, and we have the new fashion. That's not what it's actually called, I'm just calling it that for fun. Mid-20th century was very popular amongst construction workers and factory workers. Even this iconic photo. The people here, you see those? Donuts. No, it's not really donuts, but you thought it was donuts for like a second. I had you. Anyway, so it paired amazingly with coffee, and this actually inspired Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin' Donuts actually made a donut with a small handle so you could grab and dunk it into your cup. Now, this is the donut that would eventually become the American donut. It was by Americans for Americans. They were so overly confident in this branding, in this service, in this business model that they changed nothing when they broke into the Japanese market. To put it in the most American way I can think of, it's my way or the highway. So you can understand that this might not have been ready for the Japanese market. 初めての日本ドーナツ. There are some sources that say that donuts in Japan first were diffused culturally from American soldiers stationed in US bases around Japan. In this isolated environment, these foods became quite popular with children. They did happen to have some sugar in them, not a glazing like a Krispy Kreme donut today, but they were a sweet. The donut soon gained a reputation as a children's snack. However, kids don't really have any money, so they don't make the best customers. Now, keeping this in mind, when Mr. Doughnuts wanted to break into the Japanese market, they realized that Dunkin' Donuts failed for a variety of reasons, most of which was that they needed some Japanese insight. So Mr. Doughnuts went to Japan and struck a deal with Duskin Company CEO Keiichi. I made up that name. His name is Seiichi. But this isn't the guy that's important. The one I really want to talk about is Mr. Donut. His name wasn't actually Mr. Donut, but I'm gonna call him Mr. Donut. And in the next chapter, we're gonna talk about Mr. Donut. This is Keiji Chiba. Unfortunately, we don't have an image. He wasn't very popular, but he certainly had a reputation. I don't know what he looked like, though I imagine he looked something like this. Or maybe this, maybe that, or this one. He was an amazing person. Let's go over his history. He was the general manager and director at Duskin. He was born in Kyushu, 1941. He became a sailor right after high school. He did not have a college education. For one reason or another, mainly his illnesses, he had to give up sailing, and on a trip to Osaka, he got a job offer to work at Duskin. He was meticulous, he was diligent, hardworking, and most of all, he was a visionary. But clearly, he set a real good impression because at the age of 29, he was assigned the franchising of Mr. Donut. This is the key to everything in our story. This is Chiba's secret box. What was in the secret box? Well, the secret box was a warehouse. And inside the warehouse was a faithfully reconstructed 50s era American diner. Why did he build a diner? Well, he wanted to market test what the location would look like in Japan. So, he secretly made this and he tested it on Duskin employees to keep this a company secret. And it's a good thing that he did because the Japanese Duskin employees hated it. To quote the man himself, they didn't like it at all. The counters were too high, the chairs were too wide, the coffee cups were too heavy, the donuts were too large and tasted funny. Too much nutmeg for the Japanese palate. He had a whole list of reasons why this would fail. And this is likely why Dunkin' Donuts failed in the first place. And so everyone involved realized that they needed a new plan. And this was Chiba's plan. He would take a rather counterintuitive approach to this marketing. He would steer away from the American design that caused Dunkin' Donuts to fail while pursuing the American image in which he thought was so novel at the time. The key word here is novelty. At the time, America was doing great. They were the symbol of success. And so They wanted to brand themselves into this American dream. So, how did Chiba reimagine the donut? Well, let's take a look at the history. Originally, the food was a blue collar food. In America in the 1950s, the working class people bought donuts. However, this demographic was not very profitable. Then, when the donut was introduced into Japan, we see that it became a child's snack in the 1960s. Again, no disposable income. Why design a food if it can't be sold? Where was all the money? Well, at the time, Japan was right on the edge of finishing their economic miracle, and so they wanted the big bucks. The food was marketed as an elite, high class food, it was luxury. They raised the price of the menu and they modeled the restaurants after the American diner. But even with this, it wouldn't have worked because there's still one more important thing. Location, location, location. So, Dunkin' Donuts in Ginza, Tokyo, failed. Mr. Donuts in Mino, Osaka, success. Why? Well, of course, we talked about the design for the Japanese palate, but specifically, Ginza was a high density, high income, urban center. Now, to our intuition of the modern economic environment, this would make perfect sense. High foot traffic, high wealth, good money. However, it was one big store that was very high in maintenance. Mr. Donuts, on the other hand, decided to market themselves in a medium density, middle class income, suburban development. I mean, I tried to find a picture for it and I couldn't. And this is a map of the area. That's how suburban and uninteresting the area was. There was no reason to take a picture in 1970, so I couldn't find one. I'm sure there's something that exists online, but that's beyond me. To quote Chiba himself, there were hundreds of suburb towns like Mino all over Japan, but only one Ginza, which is to say that they really put all their eggs in one basket, while Chiba was looking to expand. And that was the game from the start. Remember, blue ocean strategy, expansion into new markets. The stars had aligned for Mr. Donuts and Keiichi Chiba, and everything worked perfectly. Looking back, it's actually very easy to overlook how perfectly and how lucky it was that all these events lined up the way that they did. It's on the dimes in which history turns. It is the personal feud that turned into a generational rivalry that brought upon the competition between these two companies. It is the acquisition, franchising, and private equity that funded and motivated all of the expansion of these corporations into the international stage. And it's the Carousel that sparked imagination, that inspired them to walk into those Mr. Donut stores and buy themselves this novel treat. It's the Carousel that brought donuts to Japan. But this video would be for waste if we didn't at least take a look at the carousel of which this whole thing was about. This is the first and last carousel. Asterisks included because it's the first in Kyushu, and last because it's the last operational carousel. We'll get to that in a bit. And this is where it is. If you look closely at this picture, you can even see the top, but you don't want to see the top, you want to see it. And unless you're willing to make $1,000 trip across an ocean to see a single donut store, well, I'm going to give you the second best thing. Let's take a ride.
Kaori Park. It's a beautiful scenic spot and lively public space tucked in between the bustling city and Hakata Bay. It has an amazing history that I hope I get to talk about one day, but ultimately the only thing you need to know is that it's adjacent to the Mr. Donut that houses the carousel that we're looking for today. And if you're ever in Fukuoka, I would definitely recommend taking the time to see this place. I came here by bike on a beautiful afternoon and well, I think the view speaks for itself. So this is the Mr. Donut in question, and if you take a look on its wall, you'll see a plaque commemorating the carousel that was the centerpiece of these restaurants. They called it the Great American Carousel Plaza. And when you enter, you certainly get the feeling that this building was from a different era. Everything from the glass ceiling to the ribbed glass panels accenting every feature of the restaurant. But what really brings it home for me are the collection of Dina-era paraphernalia that furnish the interior of this location. There is a great deal of attention taken to each item in this restaurant. Even if they don't serve a functional purpose, they invite you into this magical sense of nostalgia. And this is the carousel. I mean, this is my face, and the carousel is behind my cheeky grin, but you can see it. It's spinning. It's mesmerizing. I'll show you a better angle in a second. It's funny because carousels aren't even from America. They were invented in England. But I think this misattribution also helps you understand that the carousel isn't what's the most important here. It's the idea of the carousel, what the carousel represents. It's the shiny, new, novel thing. Saying that this carousel is the carousel that brought donuts to Japan takes a lot of mental gymnastics, but it also makes a pretty good video title, so I'm gonna stick with it.
And that's it. Thank you for listening to my presentation. This has been the carousel that brought donuts to Japan. If you're ever in Fukuoka, I hope you take the time to visit this location and admire history in its preservation and can appreciate the history and culture of Japan. I hope you learned something new today, or at the very least found this entertaining. My name is Luke, but you can call me Lucky. I'll see you in the next class.